Grandfather visits us. I must go. Ask him where he sends me. He will take my place. Do not fear. See, I am with you every day. I am your father, Samuel, who dwells with God. Pray to him, the Lord, and ask him that my dear grandchild reaches her goal. She is now over the North Pole, in the icy heights. That is the shortest way to America. Heli will soon reach Sao Paulo. She is now flying over the shore of Panama. She will then stop the Black One, the mestizo, from seizing Bertha. Give penance and pray for Bertie. Bertie has just given birth to a small Negro. Heli came too late.
Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, had a lifelong interest in paranormal phenomena. Is there a realm beyond the veil? Are there ghosts? And can we commune with them? I don't mean to get all psychoanalytical off the bat with the whole "it begins with the mother" thing, but in this case, Jung, the supernatural, superstitions, and a certain sensitivity to spiritualist phenomena, it does all begin with his mother, Emily Presswork, or Emily Jung, as she became in marriage. Emily Presswork was a somewhat troubled individual. Her father, Samuel Presswork, was a church pastor and wholly accepted the reality of spirits. He kept a chair in his office to the somewhat chagrin of his current wife, Gustelli, for the ghost of his deceased first wife. On occasion, he would isolate himself in his office in order to have intimate conversations with her. He was so troubled by spectres generally that he made his children, none more so than Emily, as she was the last to leave home, stand behind him for hours on end as he wrote his sermons, shooing away ghosts that might scramble his thoughts. Gustelli, Samuel Presswork's wife and Emily's mother, when she was young, also had a strange experience. She fell into a trance and was pronounced dead by doctors. Days passed. She was laid in her coffin and funeral plans were underway. But her mother, not able to accept the death of her daughter, poked her with a red-hot iron, which brought her screaming back to life. This was a story that Emily enjoyed telling her son, Carl Jung. Upon coming back to life, Gustelli regularly had visions, made prophecies, spoke in tongues, and recounted past lives. So Samuel and Gustelli, as you can see, were quite the pair. And this was the world that Emily grew up in. This was what constituted ordinary life for her. That deeply informed her worldview. She similarly had mediumistic abilities, entered trance states, communed with the dead, had an active interest in all things occult, and famously, as Carl Jung recounts, had two personalities, which manifested as caring, loving mother by day, uncanny, primal, archaic and ruthless seer by night. Jung, on occasion, heard her speaking to herself in a voice not her own. Growing up into adulthood then, Emily had recurring bouts of mental illness, which required hospital treatment. She was prone to depressive moods and was otherwise described by others as fat, ugly, and authoritarian. She was evidently the catalyst which inflamed Jung's interest in the supernatural, in the uncanny, and in particular in seances. Seances being, of course, meetings in which people attempt to make contact with the dead. From his teenage year onwards, Carl Jung regularly participated in seances. In his student days, his mother even organised several seances in their family home. And from 1897 onwards, when he was 22, Jung began keeping detailed notes of the seances he attended, which would ultimately serve as the backbone for his doctrinal dissertation. His dissertation was on the mediumistic abilities of another member of his mother's extended family, his cousin Helene, known as Heli. The paper argued that the abilities of the medium, in this case Heli, could be explained not through an appeal to the supernatural, but emergent out of her own particular psychological state of mind. I began this video with a short enacted portion of a transcript from those seances. Note that Heli does make direct reference to Jung's maternal grandfather, whom I've already mentioned, Samuel Preiswerk. What Jung's paper seeks to do then is dismiss and explain away paranormal phenomena, a position which is apparently at odds with his mature thought, as I shall show. So what can explain this mismatch? I think there's a couple of possibilities. Perhaps the conclusion of the paper did genuinely articulate his position at the time, a desire or need even to find a naturalistic explanation for the phenomena he witnessed. But ultimately, despite the conclusion of the paper, his own experience ultimately challenged a solely naturalistic understanding of such things. Or, another explanation is the conclusion may just serve a far more pragmatic end. Namely, he didn't want to alienate his conservative audience. He was seeking to have his dissertation be accepted by the medical faculty of Zurich, after all. Whatever the case, this paper certainly did not put to rest his interest in seances, the occult, and spiritualism. In fact, it was really just the beginning. Throughout the following decades, he spent much time going to seances and exploring spiritism. In the remainder of this video, I'll go through Jung's own more direct experience with ghosts and paranormal phenomena. The first is from his teenage years. He sat in his bedroom and suddenly he heard a bang from the next room. He went through to find his mother, who had been knitting but was equally shocked by the sound. They discovered that their solid walnut dining table had split wide open. There was no environmental factors that could explain this incident, and the crack itself did not move along any connecting joints or even follow the grain of the wood. On further investigation, Jung also discovered a metal bread knife in a nearby cabinet, which had similarly shattered into separate pieces. Jung kept those pieces of that exploded bread knife for the rest of his life. They represented an inexplicable puzzle piece that he wanted to integrate, ultimately, into his own meta-theories. Now, jumping forward from 1913 onwards, following his break with Sigmund Freud. As an aside, it should be noted that it's often assumed uncritically that Jung's psychology was built upon the thinking of Sigmund Freud, and this point is way overstated. Most of Jung's theories have their origins pre-Freud, emanating from his doctrinal paper, his interest in the occult, and in parapsychology, and in the work of other non-Freudian theorists. Nevertheless, the relational breakdown did have its bearing, prompting Jung to embark upon an extended period of self-experimentation, in which he attempted to study the collective dimensions of his own fantasies, entering active imagination states in which he could dialogue with the figures who appeared. Ultimately, this material culminated in Liber Novus, or as it's more commonly known, the Red Book, which expands upon his own symbolic cosmology through prose and through artwork. The work blurs the line as to whether he's communing merely with projections of his own unconscious or communing with spirits of the dead. It seems to oscillate between the two. But in the closing pages of the book, the section known as the 7 Sermons to the Dead, it's here where his communing with the dead specifically is most apparent. Indeed, the text was written as a means of dispelling the ghosts which were haunting him in his own house. Quoting the text directly then, it says, "Then I said to the dark ones, 'So speak, you dead.' And immediately they cried in many voices, 'We have come back from Jerusalem.'" That being a reference to believers going in search of the holy sites in Christianity, but they do not satisfy, where we did not find what we sought. "We implore you to let us in. You have what we desire, not your blood, but your light. That is it." In a strange way, Jung seemed to both believe it and disbelieve it at the same time. He always used Friedrich Nietzsche as a cautionary tale, an example of someone who believed their own spontaneous creation unto madness, whereas Jung kept himself at a critical distance, psychologically speaking. In 1920, while on a trip to England, he experienced an unexplicable presence while staying in a cottage. And in the winter of 1924, while spending some time in his newly built tower on Lake Zurich, he encountered a ghostly presence there. Also, he heard music and envisioned young peasant men encircling his tower, laughing and singing. Evidently, Jung did believe in the psychological reality of ghosts, a psychological reality which could have a bearing not just within the solipsistic mind of the individual or in the medium in question, but have a tangible effect on the material world also, move objects or even split tables. Does this not constitute a belief in ghosts? If it looks like a ghost, sounds like a ghost, well then, yes, I would conclude that the answer must be yes. Or perhaps if we were to ask Jung the question directly, he would give the same answer he did concerning God. He would say, "I do not believe, I know."